Have you ever been asked what causes you to faint and how do you become strong? And what will happen when do you not eat? All of those questions are related to the lesson that we are going to discuss in this video. Animals and human cells get the energy they need from the food what they eat. The digestive system breaks down the food into molecules. The cells convert those molecules into form of energy they can use. When you breathe out, you get rid of the carbon dioxide during cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is the process by which cells in animals and humans break down sugar and turn it into energy, which is then used to perform work at the cellular level. The purpose of cellular respiration is simple. It provides cells with the energy they need to function. If living things could not get energy they need out of food, it would be absolutely worthless. All living things would eventually die, no matter what the quality and amount of the food. Cellular respiration is a set of metabolic reactions and processes that take place in the cell of organisms to convert chemical energy from oxygen molecules into adenosine triphosphate or ATP and then released waste products. Let us discuss now what is the role of adenosine triphosphate in the cellular respiration. Adenosine triphosphate or ATP is an organic compound and hydrotrope that provides energy to drive many processes in living cells, such as cellular respiration. ATP is the cell source energy. It is used by almost all biological reactions that occur in your body. Let's now discuss the two kinds of cellular respiration. There are two kinds of cellular respiration. The first is the kind what we call aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration takes place in the presence of oxygen. Aerobic respiration is the process by which organisms use oxygen to turn fuel, such as fats and sugars, into chemical energy. And lastly, the last kind is called anaerobic respiration, which is the second kind of cellular respiration. Anaerobic respiration takes place in the absence of oxygen. Anaerobic respiration doesn't require oxygen. It also produces less ATP per glucose molecule. And lastly, we have also three phases of cellular respiration. The first is breakdown food, two is hydrogen transport, and is energy transfer from food to ATP. And the chemical reaction that occurs are use of ATP and dehydrogenation. To break down food, the process of cellular respiration needs glucose and oxygen. Now, let's move on and let's discuss the three major pathways. The first pathway is what we call glycolysis. Glycolysis is the first pathway in cellular respiration. This pathway breaks down one glucose molecule and produces two pyruvate molecules. There are two halves of glycolysis, with 5 steps in each half. The first half, which is first 1 to 5 steps, is what we call the energy requiring phase. In this phase, the starting molecule of glucose gets rearranged and two phosphate groups are attached to it. While the 6 to 10 step, which is second half, is called energy releasing phase or the energy payoff phase. In this phase, each 3-carbon sugar is converted into another 3-carbon molecule, pyruvate, through a series of reactions. In organisms that perform cellular respiration, glycolysis is the first stage of the process. However, glycolysis doesn't require oxygen, and the many anaerobic organisms that do not use oxygen. also this pathway. Glycolysis takes place in the cytosol. Next, we'll look at the individual steps in greater detail. Each step is catalyzed by its own specific enzyme, whose name is indicated above. The reaction arrow in the diagram above. Step number 1. A phosphate group is transferred from ATP to glucose, making glucose phosphate. Glucose phosphate is more reactive than glucose, and the addition of the phosphate also traps glucose inside the cell, since glucose with a phosphate can readily cross the membrane. Next is step 2. The glucose phosphate is converted into its isomer fructose phosphate. Next, the step 3. A phosphate group is transferred from ATP to fructose phosphate, producing fructose 5-phosphate. This step is catalyzed by the enzyme dihydroxyacetyl phosphate or DHP and glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. They are isomers of each other, but only one glyceraldehyde phosphate can directly continue through the next step of glycolysis. Next is the step 5. DHAP is converted into glyceraldehyde phosphate. The two molecules exist in equilibrium, but the equilibrium is pulled strongly downward in the scheme of diagram above, as glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate is used up. Thus, all the DHAP is eventually converted. Let's now proceed to the 6 to 10 steps. Here, we'll look in more detail at the reaction is lead to these products. Step 6. To have reaction occur simultaneously, glyceraldehyde phosphate or one of the 3 carbon sugar formed in the initial phase is oxidized into NAD, is reduced to NADH and H+. The overall reaction is exergonic. Review the picture above that's showing the step number 7 until the step number 10 of the second stage of the first pathway. And now, let's move on to the second major pathway of cellular respiration, which is the citric acid cycle, or what we call and also known as the Krebs cycle. It's the second pathway in cellular respiration, and it also takes place in the mitochondria. The rate of the cycle is controlled by ATP concentration. In eukaryotic cells, the pyruvate molecules produced at the end of glycolysis are transposed into mitochondria, which is sites of cellular respiration. Now, let's move on the third and final major pathway of the cellular respiration. Let's talk about the electron transport chain. Electron transport chain, it occurs mainly in the mitochondria of a eukaryotic cell. Electron transport chain is also called group of electron acceptor molecules, while concentration gradient takes place when the concentration of molecules is higher in one area compared to the other area. It manages the sequence of reaction by passing on two electron to electron acceptor molecules. During the stage, high energy electrons they are released from ADH and FADH, and they move along electron transport of the mitochondria. An electron transport chain is a series of molecules that transfers electrons from molecule to molecule. Now, you already understood what we discussed about the major goal and the importance of cellular respiration, two kinds of cellular respiration, and the three major pathways of cellular respiration. We will now move to the lesson of the difference between lactic acid and fermentation. Alcohol fermentation occurs in microorganisms such as yeast and converts glucose to energy, which is released as carbon dioxide. Lactic acid fermentation occurs in certain bacteria, yeast, and muscle cells and converts glucose to energy. Its byproduct is lactate. Lactic acid fermentation refers to a metabolic process by which glucose is converted into the metabolic lactate and cellular energy. Occurs in lactobacillus, yeast, and muscle cells. It produces lactic acid molecules from the pyruvate. It involves lactic dehydrogens and pyruvate decarboxylase. It also used in the production of yogurt and cheese. Let's move to the alcohol fermentation. Alcoholic fermentation refers to a metabolic process by which glucose is converted into ethanol and carbon dioxide. It occurs in yeast and other microorganisms. It produces ethanol and carbon dioxide from the pyruvate molecule. It also involves pyruvate dehydrogenase. Alcohol fermentation used in the production of bread, beer, wine, and vinegar. Now that I have discussed our lesson and understood the importance of cellular respiration, we can now answer the question before we start. It is important that we eat because this is where we get our energy so that we can perform work at the cellular level. Therefore, if we do not eat, we will be lethargic and have no energy. So, you need to eat enough always and eat in the right time. That's all for today. Bye!